I would like to welcome you all once more. My name is Lukas Feireiss, and today marks the final session of the Healing Arts, a series of discursive encounters at the intersection of art and medicine. I have now hosted for 2 semesters here at the Berlin University of the Arts. And the Healing Arts aim to establish a safer and braver space for dialogue and action, a third space of sorts that in the exploration of art and medicine, creativity and healing aspire to contribute also to a better understanding of ourselves and our existence and create involving perspectives from medicine, science and art and actually everyone else in the room. It was also a very beautiful collaboration between the Berlin University of the Arts and the Charité in general, or more specifically with the International Society for Arts and Medicine. Now, today's speakers are 2 very special guests, and I'm honored to have you both here on stage. I'll start with Professor Dr. Med and Dr. Is it Jalid or Jalid? Jalid Sehouli, and we came across, before I introduce you with your biography, we came across, I think it was in October last year at the Charité. There's also a network for art and medicine at the Charité. And I was invited to a panel and you gave a presentation there. And I was very intrigued by your presentation. In that same semester, a colleague and your wife, Adak Pimoradi, presented here as well, or entered into the dialogue, and you were also here as a guest. So there's a continuation happening. But Professor Dr. Sehouli is medical director of the Department of Gynecology, including the Center of Oncological Surgery and Department of Gynecology and Professor at Berlin's Charité Hospital. But he's also a writer of scientific as well as fiction works. And in 2012, your first fictional book, Marrakesch, was published. And your second work, I think it's only in German, und von Tanger fahren die Boote nach irgendwo, and from Tangier the boats go to somewhere, was published in 2016. And in this book you use Tangier, the hometown of your parents, as a starting point for philosophical and also autobiographical reflections that also encompass your life here in Berlin. And in 2018, you addressed the challenging aspects of doctor-patient communication in a book called Von der Kunst, schlechte Nachrichten gut zu überbringen. So, of the art of conveying bad news, which will be maybe also one of the topics, like how do you communicate actually these type of things? So this is to you now, and then Nnenna, Onuoha. I've been trying to invite you to various things for a couple of years now, and finally I got you. Correct, no? So I've been involved in this whole discussion of art and medicine and art and healing for also not such a long time, maybe 3 years now. And from the get-go, I've been trying to get you on board for various kind of panels or symposiums, but somehow the timing never really worked out. And I came across your work through a collaboration you did with Edna Bonhomme, who was also one of the speakers here last semester, a project called Cartographies of Care, which was an exhibition and film works that kind of look into the experience of the German healthcare system from a Black perspective, and also of, let's say, alternative forms of Afro-diasporic healing, or healings. Very beautiful and very poetic and very personal. You are a Ghanaian Nigerian researcher and a visual artist, or sometimes you're also called a visual anthropologist. You're based here in Berlin since 6 years, and your research explores quote-unquote monumental silences surrounding the histories and afterlives of colonialism across West Africa, Europe, and the United States. At its core, your work asks, how do we remember? Which paths do we choose to perform, and why? And the second strand of your work focuses on archiving Black experience in the present to understand how, amidst all of this, we practice care and repair for each other. You are currently a binational doctoral researcher in media anthropology at the Harvard University and Global History at the University of Potsdam. So these are our wonderful speakers. Please give a warm applause to them. The way this thing works is that each of you gets 15 minutes here on stage to kind of briefly introduce yourself, your topics, your research, one after the other, and then we enter into a conversation. I will open up the conversation with a few questions, but then it's basically a conversation for the entire room that we can have here. That said, I would like to ask you, Jalid, to the stage. And a warm applause and welcome.
So, dear Lukas, so really apologize for my delay because I never been so in time because my secretary fixed it on 7 o'clock and still a conference. But nevertheless, congratulations, Lukas, to your wonderful engagement and effort. And before I give a teaser, I like to introduce myself. So I'm Jalid Sehouli. My parents have been Itaris from Morocco, from Tangier, in the north of Morocco, and they came in 1961 to Berlin. Very unusual because most of the Moroccan took the way to Brussels or to Paris. But my father decided to go to Germany because he was sitting in the train and then he met some person and then he arrived in the north of Germany. And if I was born in Berlin, my mother wanted to name me Jalid. So she asked her neighbor how to write Jalid. And they thought, okay, Jalid, it must be like Juan. So, like Juan Carlos. So that's the reason I'm, I think, the only one in the world who is written by Jalid. But it's okay, it's nice because for me it's much more important the attitude and the faces and the stories than any contracts or papers. Nevertheless, I was born here, even in my hospital, and I started as a patient because I got a very serious car accident as a child, and then I switched to become a nurse because my baccalaureate was not good enough to become a medical student, so I decided not to go as my brother did to become a lawyer, so I decided to become a nurse. And after 1 year, I've been invited for an interview at Curated. It was formerly not Curated, it was Rudolf Virchow. And then I started as a nurse, and after 1 year I got the invitation for an interview by Curated. So, and now I'm the director. I've been now 28 years, more than 28 years now, I'm in the hospital. And it's wonderful because even based on our relationship, I love the city because there are so many networks and different people. And that's the reason maybe why I even touching fields what a normally doctor in my position is not doing, because I'm not renewing something, I'd like to add something. And to start maybe as a teacher, so how is health defined? Do you know how is health defined? What is the definition of health? Who is knowing this? What is the definition of health? By the WHO in 1942 is defined. So.
You don't care about some problems, you feel wonderful.
Great.
No questions.
No questions, difficult, but at the end of the day, health is defined to be socially, physically, and mentally in well-being. So it's not the presence or the absence of any diseases, okay? So if you think that health is defined by these three elements, everything was strengthened, the health is good. But medicine has changed their behavior since they believe it's a science. And it's nice, but they try to classify and to categorize. So this is a modern character of medicine. But medicine is much more than counting and calculating and classifying. It's even sharing experiences. And that's the reason why I love your relaunch of thinking how we can strengthen health. And I love it because we are good, but not good enough. And medicine is trained to find disorders. But medicine at all is blind to see health and to strengthen health. So there's somebody talking to you who is really a protagonist of the university medicine, and I'm a scientist. But a scientist is also an expert to see the leakages and to see what we can do better. So this is the reason why I'm so proud to see you and I'm starting, because I love to write. Yes, maybe even based on the history of my parents, I don't know, because they've been not able to write, but I love to write. And I write because for me it's dancing, it's touching oneself and others. And writing is both silence and speech, and writing is life itself. I will come back later. So I'm a surgeon, so I'm doing surgery and specialized in cancer surgery, 8 hours, 10 hours, resecting 500 tumor lesions in the abdomen in a space of 1.2 square meter, and to deal with situation where people are in a very, very extraordinary situation. And for me, it's writing something what is really healing, because I got an attack 12 years ago. 2 guys came in my office and broke me 2 fingers, 3 ribs, after surgery of 8 hours in my hospital. And nobody knows whose, but I think some relatives have blaming me because a patient died 1 month after my advanced surgery. And I started to write 4 hours later on the intensive unit care, because writing was helping me to find any orientation. And I wrote 4 hours later, and you can believe that you'd never expect that somebody come in your room and break your bones. But I felt that writing is my closest friend. Despite the support of my family, of my wife, but writing was one of the most driver to find me a way, an answer. So I was just writing my book, Tanger. So Tanger, because Tanger is one of the most exciting cities. So if you love literature, Truman Capote, Paul Boats, William Tennessee, so many, many famous writers found their islands in Tanger, and it's one of the really most attractive cities. And I was writing, and I just wrote at the time of my divorce about Marrakesh to talk about myself, because in any existential crisis you always ask where you are, where do you coming from, what is your soul. And if I finished Marrakesh, this was my first book to describe something in a different way. Not as a doctor, not as a scientist. A scientist is writing everything like a protocol. But to let even question open. I decided to write about Tanger, and it was nice. I explored many things because I don't know anything about a city. We went every year by car on the land route with my family to Tanger. But I never went to a museum. I never went to a theater. We went to our families. And so I started writing the book to explore the city, the country, and to understand even the history and even the similarities to Berlin, to Germany. Tanger was the largest post office beside Berlin during the First War. Nobody knows. But you know, we have some difficulties with history. So I love to listen to you, because history is the backbone for every innovation, but you have to remind yourself. So, and then I got the attack and I just wrote, and then my book got an emotion. Because writing without emotion is very difficult. It's nice to make words, But to touch your soul, you need something. And this is the reason why I even love to use writing to go in dialogue by yourself and with other people. So I'm just writing now a roman about the Second War to describe a person who went in the Second War and changed the identity as a Moroccan. He is with blonde hairs, changed the identity with a German. Karim switched to Hans and tried to change his identity because war have never been a winner. And I'm writing, so I love to write, and I'm writing the roman. Of the other side, I did surgery on this woman. She was 187 kilo and she suffered from endometrial cancer. And I did surgery on her because I met her some years ago. I visited her, I've seen her at one of the events, and I told to the doctor, a close friend of her, be careful of this woman because obesity is a cancer risk. Nevertheless, 5 years later, she got cancer, and the doctor reminds this story, and I did surgery on her, and on Saturday I'm always cooking for my family, and so we sent by WhatsApp the picture of our food. And so she decided that we write a cooking book. And as a person who really loves to write and to become a bestseller in roman, it sounds not really nice to write a cooking book because cooking book is really something different. But at the end of the day, it's a dialogue, it's a relationship. And for me, it was an experiment. Can I write a book with somebody who I treated and she was dependent on me because I did the cancer surgery, I did the cancer treatment, but it's possible if you define the role. And that's the reason why I love to do it. It's something different, but even this is the idea of writing, to become in dialogue and to show respect. And she checked all my prescription, and I'm a Moroccan root, so I'm cooking by my emotions, but she liked to have the protocol. It was horrible, but it became much better. And what is the breaking bad news? What is the news? The news is not only little. For me, it's a definition of bad news, something, a potential news, what can influence your perspective on now and tomorrow. So if you use this definition, you will accept that we, as a doctor, for instance, meet more than 200,000 conversations about bad news, but we are not trained. And especially if you become fear, you have even spiritual questions, but we don't touch them. And how to visualize emotions and questions. And that was the same what I experienced by my writing books after the attack. It's nice to write, to be in position, even if you don't have answers. It's nice to start with a question. And this is something what is really difficult for medical students and even for doctors. I did a study in asking how they are trained in breaking bad news, and many of the medical students, but even the doctors, are not trained. They have no skills to overcome these challenges. And what is even very interesting to see in other trials I did with my team, that every third woman believed that the doctor don't tell the whole story of truth. And this is something what we have to be aware. And I think this communication is really of the key issue. It's not the wording, it's the relationship. It's the attitude, the commitment. So we are training medical students and doctors how to use verbs and wording. But this is marginal. It's more the commitment, the attitude, the relationship that you want to go in communication, that you even want to go in relationship. This is much more relevant than to have a baccalaureate or the best notes in high school. So, but how we can communicate, and maybe we can discuss it later together, in the era of digitalization. Is artificial intelligence maybe a better doctor than human? Because they can listen to you, the artificial intelligence. The doctor is frequently unstressed, they are not trained. If you tell a doctor you have pain, in general the doctor will ask you, how is the grade of this pain? If you use the same with the artificial intelligence support, they will say, I'm so sorry that you have pain. And then they will ask you much more in detail. So I'm not proactive for artificial intelligence, but we should use maybe this question maybe to optimize verbal or non-verbal, and especially if you can't speak the language, if you don't understand the consequence of your treatment decision, then the verbal and non-verbal approaches become more and more important. That's the reason why I introduced in my center creative writing since now 5 years for cancer patients, to overcome, to visualize, beside painting and music, to use any arts to visualize emotions and questions without demanding to find the right questions and answers, and how to see the other perspective. And this is maybe even a place of arts, to use arts to visualize the perspective of the patients. And it's very funny. There's a first checklist for patients, how to prepare for breaking bad news. And I did the same for nurses. And I think that expressive therapies is a part of this, using creative therapies about visualizing, articulating emotions and souls. And this is something what I really love to bring in a holistic approach to this field, besides science. And this is Avicenna, even Senior. Rudolf Virchow, he was a socialist, he was anatomic, he was a pathologist, but he was also a doctor and interested in history. And humanities is something new, but it's not really new, because the definition, what we just said, is something what is old. But maybe we can establish this in our efforts to bring arts and medicine as a principle dealing with diseases and healing. And this is my life writing. And I cannot be any more a doctor without this possibility to express myself. And this is even my life slides. Because Rudolf Virchow, one of the grandfather of Charité, was always cited that he defines the cell as the origin of any diseases. Yes, but only in the social cultural context. And this is medicine, and that's the reason why we have to relaunch our activities beside all options and challenges of so-called personalized medicine. But personalized medicine without using your competence, the power of arts, is impossible. So this is my teacher. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Another warm applause for Nnenna.
Thank you. So hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm mostly going to, over the next 15 minutes, kind of explain why I do what I do, and then I'll show examples from 3 existing projects. But I wanted to start, since you mentioned the many invitations to get me here, I wanted to start with kind of what the processing of that information has been for me. Which was, I think it led to a lot of kind of mini identity crises, to be invited to a program about healing and about medicine, because I realized in thinking, what will I possibly talk about here, that I've spent most of my life kind of avoiding medicine and healing, specifically because I come from a family in which everybody's a doctor. So my father is a gynecologist as well. My mother is a doctor. All of their siblings are doctors. My siblings are doctors. And so I think in a typical kind of rebellious youngest kid fashion, I always said that there were too many doctors in the family, and I would do something that had nothing to do with the sciences or medicine. So I would be a historian, I would be an anthropologist, I would be an artist, but enough healing in the family. And so I think when you sent the invitation, Lukas, I thought very immediately, obviously, I would talk about cartographies of care, which was a project about people speaking about Black people speaking about their experiences with medical racism in Berlin. But as I started putting together what I would talk about, I had this question come up of, well, actually, is there a way in which the historical work that I am doing could be seen in a way as also healing? And I think, and this is the identity crisis, I came to the answer of, well, yeah, it could possibly. And so I realized, and there's this quote from Alice in Wonderland that encapsulates it. It says it takes a lot of running to stay in the same place. So I realized that I'd done a lot of running to get away from medicine, and had teased my parents that I was going to become the wrong kind of doctor through the PhD, but maybe I was doing quite similar work to them after all. But anyway, this is a new idea, and I'll present it to you now. I wanted to begin with this quote from Dion Brand as kind of exploring what I'm interested in. I don't like to read slides, so I'll leave it for a bit for you to read. And then I'll just put it in different words, but she's basically talking about the fact that kind of history is always present with us. And this has been my experience. So I've moved around a lot, and in every place that I go to, no matter how far away from home it is, I always find that there is some historical connection between that place and where I'm from, and I find that that keeps repeating itself in my everyday life. And so I will say this has been kind of what my work has then become about looking at that history and figuring out how we can communicate it. Another quote, again, I'll give you a couple seconds to read and then I'll paraphrase. So this is from the description of a book film installation called Aphasia by Yelena Juresa, and it's been helpful in thinking about the question of, okay, could my work be called healing in some way? And so she in this work is looking at Belgian colonialism, Austrian kind of anti-Semitism, and then another war that happens, and she's using this medical concept of being able to find the right words to think about, okay, is this something that can be happening on a societal level, so that there are these very violent kind of colonial and political moments that we as a society are unable to find the words for, and what damage does that do if we're not able to look at those things and process them. And so I think in a similar way, again, in looking at the past and figuring out how do we articulate it, this is kind of a similar thread that my work is doing. Another phrasing of what she calls aphasia is what Trio calls silencing. And so in his book, which again I recommend, he talks about these things as historical silence, and he tries and identifies kind of 4 moments in which these silences enter the historical narrative. So when we're making sources and choosing what gets written down, when we're making archives and choosing what gets stored, when we're writing history and choosing what sources we use, and then when we're building kind of memorials, etc., and choosing what gets put on the street into everyday usage. So again, in looking at what things are we not able to articulate or what silences they are, I find that it's important for me to figure out which kind of silencing I'm dealing with, and then to figure out how best to then address it. And again, this is an intro. It's going to be a lot of text up front, and then we'll get into clips, etc. This is the final thing. So you've seen kind of the what am I doing history, why am I doing it, to deal with the silences, and this final slide is a kind of how. I'm gonna give you a few seconds to very quickly skim it, and then I'll explain, because this is a bit academic in language. Okay. Thankfully, this is recorded, so you can come back to the full code later. But this mainly addresses the how. So the thing with a lot of colonial history and histories of enslavement and racism, etc., is that there are not a lot of sources, right? And in disciplines like history, there is a lot of kind of fetishization of sources. And so if you don't have the written sources, you can't write certain things. And critical fabulation, which is introduced by Saidiya Hartman, is one way of sidestepping this. So when there are sources, I can write something in my academic work, but in my artistic practice, I like to use this other method. And basically what it is a kind of researched or informed speculation. So she's kind of accepting that there are some human experiences that will never be reflected in the text because of who is writing the text. And so her idea is, the critical part of it is that you research as much as you can around a topic, around a person, and then based on what you know, you just kind of try and imagine the rest and fill in the other gaps. And that can be a way to kind of restore the humanity or interiority of people who wouldn't otherwise be documented. She's speaking about, in this article, an enslaved woman who, in those times, in the early 1600s, the only archives you have of enslaved people are in ship logs as cargo. So she's saying kind of, she reads all that she can in the ship logs, and then she can kind of imagine also as a person what it must have been for this woman that she's interested in to have been through that situation. So that's a similar practice that I use also in my artistic work. So I research as much as I can, and then just try and fill in the other gaps to humanize people. So now you have a basic grasp of my approach to things, but I'm gonna make it a bit more concrete by showing you 3 projects that I've made. The first one is a short film called The A-Team. This one starts a bit more personal. So it's a film I made with 13 other classmates from high school. Basically, we had gone on an exchange trip to Jackson, Mississippi. And at the time, it seemed like an okay trip, but I noticed kind of more than 10 years later that there was something about that trip that kept haunting us. So the trip had been in October, and every October since then, somebody would remember something and text me out of the blue asking kind of if I remembered this, had it really happened, etc. So the film is mostly me on the phone with everybody else asking them kind of what they remember about the trip, and then trying to kind of visually show some parts of the trip. There are a lot of pictures and video, but think through how to kind of make things not so clear, one, to match the texture of the memory, but also to protect people a bit. I'll play a clip from this, and then we can talk about it later as well.
Looking at 10 years data, I think the immediate thing is to not be too hard on myself or any one of us.
I think the picking cotton thing is the thing that I thought about the most. Like having that moment when I was like 17 or something, and then coming back years later to be like, yo, that was fucked up.
Wait, we went to a cotton field. Is that what you said? Really? I don't remember that part at all. I don't remember it at all. Like nothing. Like I'm confused.
I feel like I suspect I put a piece in my pocket.
I think the fascination was more like, oh, this is what cotton looks like. Like, oh wow, like I've never actually touched cotton before. Amazing.
The pictures we took there, outrageous pictures, all kinds of poses.
You're seeing these pictures on Facebook now. Maybe if I go through pictures, it will jog my memory and I'll remember a few things. Oh my God, I'm going to the pictures on Facebook and I'm literally in the field. Why don't I remember this? I'm here. I'm actually remembering a few things.
Okay. So again, we can talk about it later, but for this, some of the questions I had, for instance, were how do we remember together? I don't know if you can tell from the clip, but some people remember exactly, some people don't. And also grappling with the fact that we're not all necessarily traumatized by the same thing. So some people found it very emotional to talk about this trip, and for others it wasn't a big deal at all. So just grappling with these questions about collective memory, especially something that's a bit traumatizing. Here are just a few pictures of how I've shown it, and we can talk more about the technical things of positioning, etc. But quickly, I wanted to show then a second piece that I've made, also about remembering. This one a bit more local, more focused in Berlin. So this I made in the Schloss Friedrichsfelde. If anybody has been to the Tierpark in the northeast of Berlin, it's this big palace that was built in the 1800s, I think. And it's used now for weddings or kind of Renaissance balls things. But another thing that's not really spoken about is the fact that the money for this Schloss was made mostly through slave trading. So the person who built it was also the person who founded the Brandenburg Africa Company that was trading a lot of people from what is now present-day Ghana. So again, looking at the idea of a history in a place that's not confronted, and the effects that has, one, on people, on Black people who are forced to kind of pass through these places, and feel the oppression, but it's not really addressed. But two, I worked with a lot of artists who do ancestral work, and so there was also the idea of doing a ritual and kind of, working with the spirits of the peoples whose bodies were sold to fund this very grand place. I'll show a clip again from it, and then we can talk more in the Q&A.
Petite young. Aucun venon. N'a qu'un venon.
Again, some pictures of how I've shown this, so mostly on buildings. And yeah, the practice of making it was also interesting, the idea of kind of let's make a ritual in this place and imagine that the people who were involved in building it are taking us through it. The last piece I'm going to talk about, there's no clip, so this is mostly videos. Also Berlin-based is Rose. So for this I was looking at kind of the Emstrasse in Berlin, and also the history of that and its possible connections, again, to German colonialism and enslaved people. And thinking about the idea of how do we navigate this very contested street in the city and in other cities throughout Germany. So it's audio recorded on the street over several years, just everyday sounds, and also interviews with people who are both for and against renaming it. And then the outline is just a map, the first one of the Emstrasse in Berlin, and this of the different Emstrassen throughout Germany. And it's made with hair as kind of a nod to enslaved people who often braided in either seeds to feed themselves or escape routes through cornrows in their hair. So the idea that there is a tradition of navigating difficult terrain through hair. So yeah, this is general overview of my practice and kind of the idea of social healing or societal healing, especially for Afro-descendant people, through kind of looking at what happened and personalizing it. If you're in town next month in August, I wanted to invite you to my next project, which is looking at the statue of a black woman in the Citadel Spandau that's also been attacked, and kind of imagining like a fictional court case for determining what should happen to memory. So yeah, if you're around, please come see that, and thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jalid. Now we can all to the stage. Maybe I'll just change the backdrop here.
Sure.
Jakob, is this okay if I put this up here?
Maybe we can just turn it off.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you both. Please, let's come to the middle of the stage here. I think we realize talking and standing is much better than sitting down.
Yes.
So, what's the connection? First of all, I want to give both of you an opportunity to react to one another and to the work of one another. But before you do that, I see a common denominator in both of you in forms of communication, obviously. Now, you spoke a lot of about like different forms of like finding the right voice or giving room for voices that are maybe not heard in very different contexts. And also both of you coming from different practices, and both of you finding another voice beside your practice. You mentioned that you are per se a scientist and a surgeon, yet you found this other language that you need to express yourself. You are an academic, you're a researcher, but you have this other language of critical fabulation in order to express yourself. Could you both talked about a little bit about it, but can you both elaborate more on the importance of having these two different practices? Because at the end, that's very much what this lecture series is about, that there are two complementary ways maybe of knowledge production and of also looking at the world. And one is maybe more, let's say, scientific based, whether it's in the humanities or whether it's in medicine, and the other one is more artistic. And they have a very different way of looking at the world. I tend to categorize them, and maybe this is also not correct, that the one is very much evidence-based, and the other one is much more ambivalence-based, and that's where the power lies. But can you share your take on this?
Yeah, I think for me, or for how my brain works, I've often done the two. Because I think when I I started just a bit earlier with writing, with academia, and then very quickly went into making films and so it's hard to separate them in my mind. I think I know to separate them because institutions separate them, so that a lot of degrees or my PhD is strictly humanities, but I think I see them as two sides of the same coin, because I can write and I can do the historical stuff or the anthropological stuff, but in my conscience is always the question of what's missing, and what's not here, and what can't I write, and why can't I write it. And so I think very early on, instead of just leaving that, I was like, okay, I will do this and submit it for whatever class during my bachelor's, etc. But I would also just write down my thoughts or make a sound piece or think about a film, etc. I'm finding it hard to explain, but I think it's also just suited how my brain works also, that I do one and I get tired and then I switch to the other and I can come back. But yeah, I think they've always been, maybe I'll hand it over and see what else comes to me, but they've always been connected in a way.
So I see the similarities to touch topics where we have some barriers in discussing these topics. Yes. And communication is one topic, the same is regarding discrimination, sexuality.
I think your microphone is maybe muted.
So I see much more similarities to even to touch topics who are really in an environment of taboo, and that sexuality, discrimination, death, misunderstanding. And I love to use different channels to visualize, and second is even maybe to see the other perspective. So I love the movies even, and I even did some movies for patients, and it's a wonderful experience even as a researcher to see much more channels where you touch the emotions. So I'm socialized as a researcher, as a doctor. There's only 0 or 1. It's always dichotomous. It's always yes or no. And I think that what even you use to touch topics, to bring it in a space without demanding immediately the answer. And this is something what is really missing even in medicine, and I think even in research, because you try to confer or you try to exclude. But there's many things between this. So I love it. And we also have a big project regarding discrimination and equity in healthcare. And for instance, all the patients in our cancer trials are classified as Caucasian. This is a classical category in research worldwide. And this is something what you even mentioned, to reduplicate things what are wrong, but nobody start to stop because they have no solution, so they still reduplicating non-then things. And that's even what we see in trials in US. They start to categorize Hispanics, people of color, but if you look on access into medicine, even in US, after 20 years categorizing people by phenotype, there's still a misbalance of access to medicine. So only to classifying is not overcoming the barriers. So this is something I really love to touch with you in your topic.
Yeah.
And now my first question was addressed like how you kind of manage that balance between these two different ways of looking at the world. understanding and communicating the world, but how do you feel does that work? This is the topic here, also on the patient side, or for the viewer side, the people that come to your exhibitions, or the people that participated in the video that kind of shared this. So what experience have you made on the healing, quote unquote, powers also of this communication in artistic ways?
Yeah.
Through written form or through maybe a more moving image?
I think it's been different in terms of audience versus participants. So I've had audience, people who see it, I guess, not be so happy that I do make this, that I move between kind of more academic and artistic. So I've had people ask in the films because, again, I take the experience of a person and try and tell that story. Somebody who wanted me to be more didactic and so it to be more of a history lesson, etc. I don't mind that critique. I don't think I will humor it because I like the idea of I'm giving like a little catalyst and then Google is free and people can go and learn more. So I don't think I will ever shift to making films that are educational. I think if people, want more education, then they can read my writing as well. But I don't, on that side, that's a need I don't feel like I need to meet. But in terms of healing, I think I do take that more seriously in terms of the people in my films. So I was trained, I guess, as a documentary filmmaker, and I realized I had an ethical issue with documentary. Because there was the idea that you would go and meet somebody and spend like an intense time together and they tell you all their deepest, darkest secrets and then you make a film and you disappear. And something about that didn't feel okay to me, that I would just like have this intense relationship with somebody for a film and then leave, and then have another intense relationship with another person and then leave. And I just realized personally also I just couldn't, I'm an introvert, so I couldn't keep, like I would love to, but I couldn't do that with everybody. And so I think since then I've pivoted to making films with people that I know that I can like still look after and still keep in touch with. So with the A-Team, making it with friends. The more historical ones, even though I'm working with actors, then working with people who also have a practice that's already related to it, so that again, they know a bit what they're getting into and they can say kind of what they're able to do and what not. And then also just the idea that I keep working with people. So Google, who did the sound for this, for instance, is doing the sound for the film that I'm showing in August. So anyway, that's a long explanation, but I guess all of this to say that I do take seriously kind of who am I recruiting into works and whose experiences and what does that take of them and is it fair, etc.
So I met huge skepticism if I started to write. And they told me you're a researcher, you're a surgeon, and it's not good to open your heart and your brain to patients. Yes. Mm-hmm. But my personal experience is very positive, and I got many patients who came only to me based on my books because they felt they can trust. And to see not only an engineer who is an expert in doing special techniques of surgery, it's even to see somebody who is able to show his own fragility. And this is something what even for me it's very nice experience, because if I do a surgery and surgery is successful, it's very easy to create relationship to patients. But to get respectful feedback, even without cutting something, was very extraordinary experience for me. Mm-hmm. And this gives me so much confidence. So I personally have only positive feedback. And even some of my books are translated in Russian and Arabic. And I cannot speak Russian or Arabic, but if I give to a patient or a relative my books, they can feel that they can go in dialogue. And this is something what I really love. It's something what I really love, because as a doctor, you invest so much time and energy, and it's nice to be a little bit authentic. And this is a part of me. So I love it. I don't want to overload patients even to use writing. But it's even nice to talk about arts. And I always make the experience, if I talk with my patient about arts, and they are artists, or they have a link to arts, they gain confidence. Because if you become sick, you lose your confidence, because everybody tell you what is missing, what is wrong, what is abnormal. And this is something what I really love, so it's a wonderful channel to use it. And this is even my recommendation. If you are linked to any type of artist, why not to use the topic to become closer to your patients and to even to learn other person's perspectives.
And what has your experience been there? You've also been running a lecture series for many years at the University of Konstanz called Blut und Tinte, Blood and Ink, where you kind of see how can literature and medicine, how they can profit from one another. And you just mentioned in your with your oncological patients, you use a lot of writing. We've now here just talked about art therapy, visual arts. We talked about music therapy, sound, dance, body. Now, actually, this is our also literature and kind of film session. But can you share some of the experience that you've made with your patients there? Because before I give you the word, one of the things we had discussed here that sometimes, like, the entry to an artistic practice is not the same for everyone. For many, it's actually quite difficult to find the right words. That's one with quite a high barrier, different to than maybe, let's say, painting or something like that. But can you share your experiences?
So, first of all, the system is not ready for this change of perspective and to make a really dynamic revolution of medicine. Because systems try always to confirm the old system. So what you do here is wonderful, but it's not a part of a regulatory, and they need rules. I think this is one topic. From the patient's perspective, it's wonderful if you focus on the process, not on the product. So we introduced creative writing, for instance, or painting, but it's not the goal to have the best book in the bookstore or the best painting in the gallery. It's nice to have it, and it's even nice to be in any way successful, but the really success is if you feel that the process giving you positive influence for your health. And this was the reason, or the experience with my book Marrakech. I don't want to close my book because I don't want to lose my friend. My environment where I'm really alone, because everybody needs some space to be alone. And for some of them are musicians, for some of this may be sports, whatever. But I think to help the person to find the best energy in this process makes maybe the difference. And that's the reason why it was much easier for us to introduce creative writing than painting for patients. Because you can write, but you are always afraid that you are not a good painter because you have even not the technique. So this is the reason why we started with writing, but it's not the end, because you can mix writing with dancing, writing with music, with painting, with smelling, with cooking. So I think it's a channel, and I think the way to find the right channel for you, this may be the best entry.
If you want to add any thoughts, please do. In the meanwhile, I'll open the conversation now to the whole room. This is the moment for you to ask any question. As you know, no shame in the game. There's no such thing as a stupid question, but this is your chance to ask a question. So who of you wants to go first? And dear online audience, this goes for you as well. Please raise your hand virtually. Do I see a question there? No. Then I give you another minute, and I have another question for you too. So last week we had Ama Yeboah and Sabine Koch here. Sabine Koch is a dance therapist.
Yes.
Ama Yeboah did a PhD at the Charité. She's a psychiatrist, psychodynamic supervision of art therapist. And she spoke, and this kind of connects to today's topic, of health literacy, which is missing. And which is also a form of communication. We spoke about like personal communication, writing things down, your ways of communicating, but in a way it feels like it's a topic that connects the two of you, health literacy. The way I understood it is to be literate, not literally speaking, but kind of understand the way the health system also works, and also the understanding of health. But what are your first notions or takes on the term of health literacy? And the importance of it.
So again, the classical medical way, even of teaching or of understanding diseases, is to interpret meta-analysis of multiple, at the best, of randomized trials. So this is the highest evidence of medicine in the understanding. Only to give you a feeling, if you do bad trials by methodological limitation or to exclude underrepresented groups, obese patients, patients with poor income, patients who cannot speak the language, is what is real world, so they are excluded. And you do meta-analysis, you can have maybe even the wrong interpretation, despite the fact there are multiple trials. On the other hand, if you have individual stories and you escort them, and even to look, if you have a disease, what's about the social environment, the partners, the education, the experience with the healthcare system, and then you have a long follow-up, it can be much more valuable to understand the disease. And the second is, if you use literature even to reflect the disease, you can maybe even better understand the perspective of the disease. And this is what we know from Thomas Mann for tuberculosis or other diseases, or to use patients' experience or their relatives to describe a disease from their idea. And it's even helping to understand, and this is a goal of normal medicine, new medicine, to be patient-orientated. But for patient-orientated medicine, you have to ask your patients and even to accept their perspective, their expectations, and their emotions if they suffer from any diseases. And this is, I think, what is missing. And that's the reason why I love to see a curriculum of medical students by science, but even to look two topics. One is, what is the impact or the role of this disease in a global health perspective, not only in Germany or Berlin? And the third is, what arts can help me to see the perspective from the patients? And that can be arts, by painting, that can be movies, or that can be nice books. So this is something what we can even create is missing. There's no place in the world what we have. But I think that can really help to decrease the barrier to be far away from the patient's perspective.
I don't know that I have a definition for health literacy since I'm not a medical practitioner, but I guess what I would add, thinking about cartographies of care, which was this project that we made with Black Berliners about their experience in the healthcare system. Something that came up a lot was people feeling that they weren't heard by their doctors, or feeling like they didn't know. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't know, it wasn't a lack of literacy about health, but that they had to know specifically how to navigate the German system here, and in what order to bring things up to their doctor, what documents they should have, etc., in order to be taken more seriously. So I don't know that that is a definition of health literacy, but I would say that that's maybe an added dimension that some people also have to have before they go forward and try and get help for whatever ails them.
I guess along with it comes also a structural competency to understand how to work within the given structures or health structures. You guys are being a bit shy. Is another question coming, or should I drop another one? Anyone daring yet? Yes, thank you. Someone has to break the ice. Oof, go for gold.
Yeah, I have a question to you, you said earlier that you picked up this practice of writing, like practicing art, later on in your medical practice, and I want to ask how including arts and writing into your lifestyle can, or if it changed your medical practice itself, like your concentration, or earlier you also mentioned like process and result. If picking up art affected your practice in medicine.
Beautiful question. I repeat it for the recording. The online audience doesn't hear it. So very simply speaking, and thank you for the question, is in how far has your writing practice affected your medical practice? And I guess vice versa, maybe, no?
So, first of all, the classical medical doctor is socialized like a soldier in the military. So they define a goal and they try to translate the goal into real world. And they are generally not trained to delegate responsibilities or activities to other professions or disciplines. So even if they don't like to convey bad news, they do it. And what I love in bringing creative writing to this, to delegate to other professions who are experts in bringing patients in dialogue with themselves, and even to bring them in a higher confidence and responsibility without I'm responsible as a supervisor. So it's helping me to go out of the scope first personally. It's wonderful because I see they work, they grow up, and they even create a dynamic for their health without my influence. So delegating items, what helping the patient is wonderful. And the second is I can do even other things. So delegation is something what is really missing in medicine, delegation to other professions first. And second is we published books in creative writing for other medical professions, how easy you can introduce this in your clinical practice. It's accepted, it's bringing adherence to the patients, and the only thing what is missing is that these activities are generally not paid by the insurance company or whatever, because this is not classical part of the system. In psychiatry, yes, and psychosomatic, yes, but not in any other disciplines. So for me personally, it's wonderful, and it's a part of my healthcare concept without that I'm dominating on monitoring all these activities. So I'm not part of this team. I'm only introducing this as an umbrella structure because it's very clear if you delegate, you have to separate even your roles. So to do surgery with your patient, to dance with the patient, to reflect with the patient is not the right way. So you need a team and you need a structure. Otherwise you can even in the conflict of interest and even your competence is not strong enough to go in deep. So for me it's impossible to delete it. So that's the reason why we will continue always in my center these activities.
Another question, otherwise I come to a closing question maybe for you. I know that you have to go to a concert tonight, no?
To concert?
Yes. If both of you could write a wish list from looking inside out and outside in, from like inside the medical system like you, or from the outside observing the medical system like in your project Cartographies of Care, what would be your wish list for the healthcare system with regards to the inclusion also of artistic practices, which has been the kind of reoccurring topic, obviously, of this series of dialogues.
That's a tricky question. I guess I would focus more not directly on like all kinds of healthcare, but more psychiatry or psychology. And it's not a novel idea that I'm having, but there has been, in the past years, a lot of people that have focused on the idea that maybe it's not individuals that are disordered, but they're just having healthy responses to being within a disordered system. And so then I suppose that the arts could be useful in terms of, rather than trying to fix people, but providing an outlet for people to process kind of, being in a world where so many things are currently on fire. That would be my suggestion.
So I like if somebody is beyond the horizon, and I think your activity is a crosstalk, what is wonderful fitting to this. It should be special point for this. It's not nice to have, it's a must to talk about racism, about arts, about patients' perspective. So I think we need structures what support these activities. Very simple thing. So if my idea will be, if a medical student take part in such seminars, or a student from university, they will jump in 1-2 semester higher than everybody else who is not doing this. Because this, what you're doing, a crosstalk, is always beside the classical system. And I can only tell you it's nice to have it, but we need a strong structure to show that this is even beneficial for every individual to go in this direction. Because it's not enough to have some active persons in the fields, because 99% of the classical medicine will not follow this route if it's not mandatory. So, and besides this structure, we will not reach what we really want. And it's no discussion, so I love it. You cannot talk about global health without talking about racism and history. But if you go to the medical seminars, it's not touching. If you're touching climate, you cannot not touch colonialism or history at all. But we are afraid, especially in Germany, to touch dialogues where we don't have this solution. But it's not necessary to have solutions. But we need spaces to show this conflict. And that's the reason why I like even your movies. I have not seen all of them. But let them space. So open a box, but let's speak for a dialogue. And I think your feedback so far is very reactive. I'm a little bit afraid of the medical students. They are still very conservative, but it's based maybe on
how many
selection.
medical students do we have in the room?
How many? Yeah, it's very minority, but it's nice. It's every change.
Good, props to
start
you.
with minorities and underrepresented groups. Please?
I would like to be a musician, so
Yes.
also as an artist. So I can also as
So anything, any final notes, anything that you wanted to say you didn't get to say?
No, I'm very proud that you did it, and we will do our best to make this really as a sustainable change. And we can make the change. It's possible, and even Berlin is one of the best places to make it. We can it.
I think so too, and I think it takes a courageous leadership to implement these things. There's not, in particular in institutions like a university or a hospital, it doesn't just grow bottom up. There has to be a top-down element as well to change the system. And it's indeed education. It's opening platforms. This has been an attempt for 2 semesters here without really hoping to find answers or solutions, as you said, but actually just encourage a way of thinking, maybe, of thinking differently maybe than you did before you entered the room here. And I thank you all for joining us here and being with us for this semester, maybe some of you also for the last semester. And please keep up kind of that open mind and keep kind of thinking outside the box, and do engage in conversations with others, your neighbors, and keep that mind open. So thank you very much to you beautiful speakers. Warm applause. Thank you for being here on this hot Monday evening.